Dawn brings no hope, only smoke, only silence. Poland, winter of 1943. The clouds cover the sky like a veil of ash, and the cold cuts the skin like a sentence. On the horizon, a grey column rises endlessly, and the wind carries a smell the world does not yet know how to name. Between barbed wire, blackened bricks, and muffled screams, there stands a place that belongs neither to heaven nor to earth. Auschwitz, the point where humanity came to a halt, where life lost its meaning and death became routine. There, the days are not measured in hours, but in shouted orders, in forced steps, in the smoke that never stops rising. Each dawn is a judgment, each night a lottery. And yet within that hell organized with German precision, an impossible question still beats. How can one remain human when the world denies you the condition of being human? What was a day like inside the largest Nazi extermination camp, where every breath was an act of resistance and every thought could be your last? What did the prisoners feel when they opened their eyes in the darkness, knowing they might not close them alive again? What words were whispered among them when language itself seemed useless in the face of horror? How did the soul survive when the body could no longer endure? These questions do not seek simple answers. They seek memory. They seek justice. They seek to understand the incomprehensible. How millions of people were reduced to numbers, and how some, even there, managed to preserve a spark of humanity. The context is relentless. In 1942, the final solution became the official policy of the Nazi regime. The machinery of death was perfected, and Auschwitz became its epicenter. It was not just a camp, it was a system, a factory of extermination designed to erase entire peoples. Trains arrived day and night, filled with men, women, and children, deceived with promises of work or resettlement. As they stepped down, they did not know that the smoke they saw was the fate awaiting them. Behind those metal doors, there was no hope, only the methodical calculation of genocide. In this place, every brick has a story, every barracks is a silent witness to pain, and every shadow cast on the snow belongs to someone who dreamed, loved, feared, and was devoured by a system built to annihilate them. Auschwitz was not an accident. It was a decision, a project of death carried out with discipline and coldness. And yet, among the ruins of dignity, there was resistance, eyes that did not surrender, small gestures of love, hands that shared the last piece of bread. This story does not seek morbid fascination. It seeks truth. Because remembering Auschwitz is not looking back. It is facing what human beings were capable of doing, and what must never be repeated. The snow no longer hides the smell of smoke, but its echoes still resound. Auschwitz is not just a place in Poland. It is an open wound in the world's conscience, an eternal reminder of what happens when indifference becomes law. This is not a story of the past, but a journey into memory. Auschwitz is not just a place. It is an open wound in history that still breathes among ruins and nearly erased names. Every wall, every object, preserves the echo of millions of voices that silence tried to extinguish. Remembering does not mean looking backward, but keeping alive the awareness of what happened so that it never happens again. Today, before the weight of silence, we choose to listen. Year 1941. Germany dominates Europe. Millions of people are deported from every corner of the continent toward an unknown destination, the railway lines become arteries of tragedy. Trains arriving like relentless machines, carrying exhausted bodies, separated families, faces that no longer look toward the future, but toward the void where stations once meant arrival. In that immense logistics, doors opening, wagons being emptied, names being lost, the design of something much greater than a camp begins to take shape. A system conceived to organize annihilation, to convert life into a permanent transit toward nothingness. In the midst of despair and at the darkest hour of humanity, the trains began to arrive, among them the first prisoners of Auschwitz. The camp does not appear by chance. It is the result of planning that takes the form of barbed wire, barracks, and chimneys. That architecture is not only physical, it is moral. It establishes categories, decides who lives and who does not, institutionalizes the denial of the other. Arrival means confronting a device that erases names and turns people into numbers, into pieces of a mechanism that turns without mercy or pause. And technical modernity becomes an accomplice to barbarism. Arrival at the camp is a place of extreme disorientation. The wagons open and bodies emerge, uncoordinated by time and hunger. The air smells of iron and distant smoke. The commands, the voices, the lights, and the dogs form a landscape that does not belong to the known human world. Confusion becomes a collective word. Where are we going? What are those guards saying? Why are they separating us from our children? Lines form through the automatic impulse of obedience. But in every step beats a question that will never have an easy answer within that enclosure of technical filth. Then comes the selection, that decisive moment that splits the continuity of a life into two irreconcilable paths. Before the line, citizens who still believe they are going to a job stop. Some are pointed to the right, others to the left. A gesture, an order, is enough to decide whether someone remains standing. The selection is not only physical, it is the crystallization of a policy that transforms death into procedure, that administers extermination with the coldness of someone signing papers. In that gesture, the camp reveals its mechanism. There is no chance, only calculation. There is no chaos, only technique applied to elimination. Here we enter the mind of a man who still believes he is going to work, unaware that he has already crossed the threshold of hell. He thinks of his family, of a promise of effort that will bring him home. He imagines the hands he will once again use to touch the family table. His steps follow the inertia of routine. But every second, the world around him shows signs he does not understand. The silence, the harsh gaze of the guards, the smell rising from the chimneys. That internal dissonance produces confusion, a childlike attempt to organize the incomprehensible, to believe this is temporary, that tomorrow everything will return to normal. As he walks, his thoughts alternate between disbelief and minimal calculations of survival. How to move within the lines, how not to attract attention, how to follow orders without stumbling. Every fiber of his body is on alert. His mind, however, tries to maintain a mental routine to stay sane, remembering names, dates, the lyrics of a song, any anchor that ties him to humanity. That intimate, minimal, fragile resistance is the seed of what some will call survival. Small acts of memory and compassion that persist even when the environment tries to erase them. On the other side of the barbed wire, the camp functions as a system. Records, lists, lines, barracks, shifts. It is an impersonal machine that requires operators, guards, administrators, technicians, and yet also depends on the indifference of those who look away. The logic of the camp erases individuality and turns death into a flow that must be managed. For the newly arrived prisoner, understanding this is late and brutal. Routine traps him before he can react, and the structure of terror has already recognized and classified him. Narrating these events is not merely listing steps. It is entering the very texture of horror. The cold that seeps into the bones, the absolute loneliness amid crowds, the incomprehension that becomes resignation or silent rebellion. It is remembering that behind every wagon there was a life with names, stories, and affections, and that arriving at Auschwitz was for many the point of no return. Understanding the system of horror means accepting its planning and its will to deny the other, and also recognizing the daily courage of those who, even then, attempted to preserve fragments of humanity among the ruins of the soul. The blow of the wake-up call tears through the dawn like a sentence. It is not only the sound that awakens bodies that no longer rest. It is the signal that sets the machinery of survival in motion once again. Upon opening his eyes, the prisoner encounters the same geography of astonishment and fear. Frozen mud or dust, barracks aligned like mechanical coffins, and the haste already embedded in numb muscles. That first minute after the call is an intimate and urgent inventory. Clothes, leftover blankets, the tattooed number that replaces a name, and at the same time a practical decision. Move without stumbling, hide a cough, feign energy where only exhaustion remains. Each sunrise was a victory, because waking up and being able to stand meant postponing for a few more hours the other fatal tally imposed by life in the camp. The endless roll calls are exercises in humiliation and control that break the day into waiting sessions, lines that never end, bowed heads, bodies added and subtracted under the voice of an officer who does not look. The roll call organizes the day and reminds prisoners of their condition, being a number that must match a statistic, being a presence that may be considered expendable. In those instants, physical endurance and mental patience are measured. Memory fixes itself on trivial details, a missing button, the voice of a neighbor who does not respond, that may become terrible signs. The roll call routine transforms time into measured agony, hours folding into waiting, into cold, into the constant wish that the list confirm what still beats, that one is still, for now, part of the count. To go out to forced labor is to enter a world where human activity becomes a tool of wear. Under impossible temperatures, frost that pierces clothing in winter, a punishing sun in summer, tasks are carried out that not only exhaust the body, but erode trust in any purpose. Digging where digging is ordered, lifting senseless loads, cleaning what the logic of the camp has rendered absurd. Fatigue accumulates in joints that no longer fully obey. Breathing becomes an uneven metronome. Thoughts conspire to remind you why you must keep going. The family that might have waited, the minimal hope that the day will end without punishment. Physical action and internal reflection blend. Each step is labor, and each step is also a question about how to remain human while executing orders that weaken the will. The soundscape and smellscape of the camp accompany the routine with ominous insistence. The murmur of boots, the crash of loads, the calls cutting through voices between blocks, and in the air, a smell that mixes dampness, cold, and distant smoke. There were no birds in Auschwitz, Primo Levi would recall. The observation is not literary. It is a sensory testimony that even nature seemed to withdraw from that place. That silence of animal life accentuates the artificiality of horror. The absence of songs and wings turns the camp into a suspended scene, where even the environment distances itself from the human life being consumed there. The testimony of those who lived through it brings truth, and above all, an unforgettable image. Nature, which usually ignores human evil, seemed here to recognize a territory that did not belong to it. Food and warmth, the most basic needs, become methodical obsessions. Reaching the barrack with something resembling human or bodily warmth is an achievement. Obtaining a piece of bread, a shared pot, equates to small secret victories. Managing the scarce food available forces strategies. Sharing in silence, hiding crumbs, exchanging a garment for a favor. But survival is not only physical, it is also moral and psychological. Maintaining minimal dignity, safeguarding one's own memory, resisting the impulse to give in to despair or brutality. In those minimal gestures, a hurried touch, a whispered song, a handkerchief passed between hands, one sees the intimate resistance that prevents the camp from fully erasing human identity. Punishments and arbitrary surprises shatter any predictable routine. Inspections, selective executions, nocturnal transfers that turn provisional safety into immediate danger. Uncertainty is part of forced labor. One may have an assigned task and suddenly be taken away for another duty or for disappearance. That mental fragility forces constant adaptation. Strategic survival thinking activates how to avoid the lethal gaze, whom not to support with a word, which spot in the line to take to reduce exposure. Action becomes calculation, and internal reflection hardens into mechanisms of self-protection that at the same time isolate. Even in the terrain of planned horror, moments of humanity survive, confirming the existence of conscience. Sharing a crumb, hiding a letter, helping a companion put on shoes, singing a verse under one's breath. These acts defy the logic of extermination and remind us that even in the worst conditions, solidarity can persist. Testimonies record those small, daily rebellions that ultimately sustained many. The memory of a name spoken with affection, the remembrance of a mother, the brief warmth of a friendly hand. These actions do not compensate for the machinery of horror, but they contradict it. They show that human life found ways, sometimes tiny, to affirm its presence against the attempt to erase it. Every night, when the lights dim and bodies crowd into frozen barracks, reflection returns with force. How to continue at dawn, what remains for tomorrow. Each sunrise was a victory, each night a question. That dual tension summarizes the daily experience of the camp. The constant alternation between the relief of being alive one more day and the anxiety of knowing the next might not come. On that edge, the routine of survival is not merely a repetition of tasks. It is a school of resistance, a forced training for the minimal hope that allows, despite everything, the count to continue. Hunger in the camp was not merely the absence of food. It was a slow machinery that stripped the human being of their most elemental substance. The body shrank, the muscles gave in, the skin clung to the bones. But alongside that physical erosion, a deeper dissolution took place. The memory that names, the history that sustains the self, the ability to affirm that one had been someone before the camp. Hunger not only emptied bodies, it emptied memories, names, identity. That sentence summarizes an atrocious metamorphosis, the reduction of a person to a walking shadow, to a number weighing less than a sack, to a presence the camp system sought to erase with clockwork precision. Going out to work with an empty stomach was crossing a threshold. Fatigue was not only the result of physical effort, but the sum of sleepless nights, cold, fears, and the persistent hunger that knows no truce. The long and mechanical workdays wore down not only hands and feet, but the will to remember who you were before arriving there. Forced labor repeated gestures that, by being endlessly performed by exhausted bodies, became automatic. Digging, carrying, dragging, obeying. In that automatism, the prisoner lost the space for reflection and, with it, the possibility of affirming their identity. Eating, when it arrived, was a desperate ritual. Each crumb became a coin of life and a motive for silent pacts among companions in misfortune. The minimal rations, the watery broth, the damp bread, were resources that generated new moral rules among the community of prisoners. Sharing could be the difference between preserving sanity or succumbing, and yet the logic of survival could also push toward betrayal, hiding scarce food, the cold calculation of who deserved what was left. Hunger transformed relationships. Solidarity became heroic and at the same time fragile. Distrust grew like a tumor corroding bonds. In those spaces, the social life of the barrack adapted. Codes were invented, small exchanges, strategies of concealment and subsistence that kept the physical and moral abyss at bay for minutes or days. Mental deterioration mirrored physical decline. After weeks and months without food, the mind began to shed details that once sustained it. Here we enter the mind of someone who, after weeks without eating, begins to forget the taste of bread. The loss of the memory of a flavor is the sign of a deeper amputation. The impossibility of reconnecting with elemental pleasures, the inability to project oneself back toward a human past. Forgetting bread is forgetting the family table, childhood, the names of those you loved. That amnesia induced by hunger was a blow the camp sought without naming it, to turn identity into emptiness in order to govern it more easily. Punishments and humiliation completed the picture of dehumanization. A tug of the ear, a beating, exposure before the others, an absurd order repeated until collapse, all eroded psychic integrity. The gaunt body endured the blows, but the mark was internal. Shame, fear, the sense that one's dignity ebbed with every slap. Survivors' testimonies record this process with sober words that describe the accumulation of small violences that, added together, annihilate resistance. There is no single moment of breaking, but a progression that, day after day, leads to moral anonymity. Prisoners developed unforeseen resources to resist. The shared memory of a song, the hiding of a note written in pencil, the gesture of offering a sip of water. Those small rebellions, a stolen embrace, a word of encouragement, the recitation of a verse learned by heart, served as bombs that prevented total loss. What hunger sought to erase, humanity tried to sustain with tiny acts. The surviving accounts highlight precisely these points, not because they mitigate the horror, but because they show that even when dehumanization was systematic, human resistance persisted in minimal and profound forms. The testimonies, raw and direct, do not seek to move through artifice. They speak from the evidence of one who lived the reduction to a shadow. Words describing the sensation of sinking, the loss of names, the slow way the mind relinquishes details that were once treasures. Repeating their voices is essential to understanding the full extent of the crime. Not only physical death, but the attempt to erase individual and collective history. Telling how hunger stripped identity is, therefore, an act of justice. Naming what was meant to be erased, restoring to the victims their names and their condition as thinking, feeling, remembered subjects. In the final axis of this reflection, the lesson is sharp and piercing. Hunger was, in Auschwitz, a systematic weapon of annihilation. The prisoner who survives not only overcomes bodily starvation, but also the attempt to turn them into something unrecognizable. To survive was, then, to preserve memory, name, and the minimal hope that the world could one day listen and acknowledge what happened. Those who managed to maintain, even in the darkest days, the ability to remember and recount, left us the moral urgency not to forget. The selection process in Auschwitz was a machinery of terror that operated with surgical precision and cold cruelty. A scene where life and death hung on the smallest gesture. A simple movement of the hand decided the fate. Left or right, life or death. That sentence encapsulates the daily brutality faced by newcomers, where time seemed to stop and hope dissolved with each step toward the camp. Each prisoner was examined not only for physical appearance, but by the cold logic of Nazi efficiency, which determined who would be able to work and who would be sent directly to death. Selection was not merely an administrative act. It was a macabre ritual that imposed the authority of the executioner over human destiny. Silence in the lines was absolute, heavy, almost tangible. The silence weighed more than the screams. No one asked questions. No one moved. Prisoners, aware of the lethal power in a single gesture from the authorities, stood rigid, paralyzed by fear, uncertainty, and despair. Every look forward, every step taken, was impregnated with terror. Not only the immediate possibility of dying, but also the certainty of the irrevocable loss of loved ones. The psyche fragmented under the pressure. The mind oscillated between disbelief, denial, and the acceptance of the horror unfolding before them. Survivors' testimonies reconstruct these scenes with heartbreaking realism. I saw my mother walk to the left, a man who survived recalled years later, and in that moment, I knew I would never see her again. That memory encapsulates the clash between the faintest hope and overwhelming reality. The certainty that death had forever taken what they loved. For the prisoners, every family member, every friend, every companion became a coin of chance before the brutal arbitrariness of the system. Selection transformed bodies into numbers and names into echoes, erasing individuality and leaving only the physical presence of those who could be exploited as forced labor. The process also imposed indescribable psychological tension on those who had to choose, such as the Nazi officers and doctors who conducted the selections. Every decision was an act of absolute power. A single movement of the hand determined who would be thrown into immediate death and who would be sent to forced labor. The humanity of the executor dissolved before the efficiency of the system, and the routine of deciding life or death became normalized in an environment where horror was every day. For survivors, every gesture from that personnel was unforgettable, a mark that endured as testimony to the systematic brutality of the camp. As bodies were separated and groups formed, fear operated on multiple levels. There was the fear of immediate death, the fear of losing loved ones, and the existential fear infiltrating each prisoner's mind, the certainty that their identity could disappear in an instant. No one asked questions. No one moved. That collective silence reflected the impossibility of action. Any attempt at resistance any protest could cost one's life. Selection was therefore not only a physical judgment, but an act of psychological domination, a reminder that every individual was completely at the mercy of a system that did not recognize human dignity. The selection process also accelerated the dehumanization of prisoners. Seeing their relatives and friends sent to death forced survivors to internalize the camp's logic, learning to disconnect emotions in order to endure daily life and the endless days of forced labor. Every look, every gesture, every step in the line was a reminder of life's fragility and of the absolute power held by those who controlled the camp. The memory of these moments remained intact in those who survived, serving as evidence and testimony of the systematic nature of the genocide. Finally, the selections did not only determine who would live or die, they established a pattern of fear that shaped the prisoners' existence throughout their entire stay in the camp. Constant uncertainty, the feeling that death could come at any moment, and the experience of watching loved ones torn from their lives created a psyche marked by trauma and permanent alertness. Each day survived was a small triumph. Each night ended without being selected for death, a silent act of resistance. Selection was ultimately a brutal reminder of the absolute control of the Nazi system and the fragility of human life under the machinery of horror. The barracks of Auschwitz were spaces where life seemed to dissolve among the cold, the filth, and the constant despair. Sleep was a luxury impossible to attain, and those who managed to close their eyes for a few hours did so with the awareness that every dawn could bring death or work, pushed to the limits of exhaustion. Sleeping was a luxury, dreaming a betrayal of reality. That sentence summarizes the psychological state of those who lived there. The mind had to remain alert, exhausted bodies resisting the machinery of terror, and hope turned into a luxury that few could afford. The mixture of hunger, disease, and overcrowding created an environment where death was present in every corner, and every gesture or word could be punished immediately. Prisoners quickly learned that survival required constant adaptation and a partial disconnection from reality. Here, we enter the mind of someone who begins to forget their own face. Depersonalization was not only an effect of forced labor or beatings, but of the environment itself. Endless lines, blows, guards' screams, the smell of smoke, sick and dying bodies piled in corners. Each prisoner had to create a sort of internal shield, an emotional barrier that allowed them to endure daily violence without losing their sanity completely. The mind became a battlefield between the awareness of horror and the need to survive one more day. Diseases were omnipresent and the filth unbearable. Fleas, rats, weakened bodies, and the lack of hygiene transformed the barracks into a scene of constant suffering. Every cold could be fatal, every cough a risk. Punishments were arbitrary and brutal, ranging from beatings to immediate executions, reminding prisoners that even the slightest infraction or an improper look could cost them their lives. Constant surveillance and the threat of violence kept everyone in a state of permanent anxiety. The combination of fear, physical pain, and psychological torment created an ecosystem where resistance and resilience were necessary to survive, even if each act of adaptation meant sacrificing part of one's own humanity. The testimonies of those who lived that life reveal the depth of daily suffering. "I never became numb," confessed a prisoner. "Every day cost me something from my soul." That sentence reflects the internal struggle of the prisoners, maintaining awareness, memory, and identity, while the environment stripped them of everything else. Each dawn was a test, each scarce meal a reminder of the hunger that gnawed not only at the body, but also at the mind. Survival required keeping one's eyes on the next step, the next moment, without allowing total despair to overtake the spirit. Life in the barracks was also marked by constant observation of others. Every gesture, every word could betray someone, and fear spread like a virus among the prisoners. Paranoia became part of the routine, and solidarity, when it appeared, was an act of silent bravery. Every conversation had to be measured, every movement calculated, and every action could mean the difference between living a few more hours or disappearing into the anonymity of the crematorium ovens. The human mind was tested to its limits, confronting the contradiction between the need to survive and the horror of the circumstances. Furthermore, depersonalization extended to one's own body. Prisoners saw themselves as numbers, bodies that had to perform tasks without questioning, without demanding, without stopping to remember who they were. One's self-identity blurred under the inhuman routine of forced labor, exhausting marches, hunger, and extreme cold. Every mirror, every reflection, seemed to show a strange stranger. A surviving body with a torn spirit, a human reduced to the bare capacity of enduring one more day. The horror was both physical and mental, and survival demanded an impossible balance between resistance and resignation. The constant presence of fear transformed even the most basic interactions. Looks that once conveyed camaraderie turned into suspicion. Gestures that once expressed affection became risks. Every decision was measured not only for its practical value, but for its ability to protect one's life. Life in Auschwitz became an art of balancing action and introspection, where every thought had to be restrained, every word doubly considered, and every moment lived evaluated, as if it were a strategy game, where the highest stake was one's own existence. Ultimately, life inside the hell of Auschwitz revealed the brutal capacity of human beings to adapt and survive under extreme conditions, but at a cost that went far beyond the body. The soul tore slowly, and identity, memory, and dignity were tested each day. The experience of the barracks, the hunger, the constant fear, and the unending surveillance left indelible scars on those who survived, marking not only their memories, but also their understanding of the fragility and resilience of human life in the face of systematic violence and organized terror. The guards at Auschwitz represented the everyday face of terror, and their power did not always lie in weapons, but in the ability to instill fear with a look, with a gesture, with their mere presence. Not all of them shouted, some only looked, but in Auschwitz, to look was to take part. That cold, fixed stare, loaded with authority, could paralyze a prisoner, break their will, and remind them at every moment that their life was completely subordinated to the decision of another human being. Every gesture of the guards, no matter how small, had a devastating effect. From the arbitrary choice of who worked and who stayed behind, to the silent intimidation that forced bodies to obey and minds to accept the inevitable. Violence was not always explicit, but it was embedded in the daily routine, in constant surveillance, in the possibility of immediate punishment. The power of the guards was deeply linked to the structure of the Nazi system, which not only dehumanized the victims, but also transformed the perpetrators. Here, we enter the mind of the executioner, who learns to see people as numbers. The training, ideology, and daily routine of the camp turned the guards into efficient instruments of an extermination mechanism, reducing people to statistics, to mere bodies to manage, to tasks to carry out. The dehumanization was double. While the prisoners lost their identity, the guards lost the ability to see the other as a human being, replacing empathy with obedience and morality with efficiency. Every decision, every routine execution, was an administrative act disguised as authority that reinforced their role in the chain of horror. The testimonies collected in later trials reveal the coldness and rationalization with which many of these men acted. Some defended their actions by claiming they were only following orders, obeying a higher system, or following protocols that had been taught to them as correct. This bureaucratic coldness shows how a systematic and authoritarian environment can shape human psychology to the point of normalizing the inhuman. The gaze that once could convey curiosity or affection became a tool of control and submission. The act of looking, of checking, of following instructions became silent complicity with organized death. In the routine of the guards, each day was a repetition of small acts that reinforced their position of power and kept prisoners in constant anxiety. The mixture of authority, fear, and blind obedience created an ecosystem where the executioner could perform his work without questioning its moral consequences. Violence was internalized, and the normalization of horror became part of daily life. Beatings, arbitrary punishments, accusatory looks, and selections for death became part of a silent code that dictated the survival of both perpetrators and victims. Delving into the minds of the guards reveals an extreme process of psychological adaptation. To survive within the system and maintain their position, they had to accept, rationalize, and even automate violence. Human emotions, such as compassion or guilt, were considered weaknesses, and indifference became an essential skill. Absolute obedience and the internalization of hierarchical power allowed the camp to function mechanically, almost efficiently, while human destruction became routine and death a resource to be managed like any other administrative task. The combination of fear, authority, and dehumanization created a cycle in which the prisoners lived under constant threat, and the guards, although powerful, were also trapped in a role that transformed them. Every look, every order, every gesture was part of a mechanism that ensured absolute control of the camp. Violence became normalized, conscience dulled, and brutality became everyday. Prisoners understood that even the absence of shouting or the stillness of a guard could signify condemnation. Passivity, too, was a form of threat. Finally, the guards of Auschwitz were both products and promoters of the system. Shaped by ideology, orders, and routine, their power was exercised through fear, and their humanity eroded gradually with each act of obedience. The story of these men shows how totalitarian structures can corrupt psychology, transforming ordinary individuals into instruments of systematic terror. Not all of them shouted, some only looked. But in Auschwitz, to look was to take part. That phrase encapsulates the essence of the power of fear. A look could decide life or death, and the mere presence of the guards turned every moment for the prisoners into an extreme exercise in vigilance and survival. The last days in Auschwitz were absolute chaos, a scenario where the organization, order, and systematic routine of horror crumbled under the pressure of the Nazi defeat and the imminent arrival of the Red Army. The forced evacuation of the prisoners, the endless marches toward unknown camps, and the abandoned bodies that piled up on the camp streets displayed a Dantesque spectacle of despair and decay. Auschwitz was not liberated. Auschwitz ran out. That phrase captures the sensation of a place that, after years of horror and systematic death, simply collapsed under its own violence, leaving the few survivors amid ruins, uncertainty, and a fear that did not disappear with the presence of the liberators. The atmosphere was one of total confusion. Weakened, sick, and disoriented prisoners wandered aimlessly while the SS abandoned their posts or fled, leaving behind the palpable evidence of what had happened. The death marches were a reminder that even in the final days, the Nazi system ensured that brutality continued until the end. The mixture of action, fear, and chaos created an almost unreal atmosphere in which each survivor had to make quick decisions to stay alive, with an exhausted mind and a body pushed to the limit. Every step was a risk. Every glance around could reveal death or salvation, and every breath was an act of resistance against despair. Amid this confusion, the minds of the survivors were trapped between relief and disbelief. Here we enter the mind of someone who survives and does not know whether that is a blessing or a curse. Physical liberation did not guarantee emotional liberation. The horror seen and lived for years left indelible scars. The memory of companions who died, of families torn apart, of children who would never smile again, accompanied every movement, every instant of those who managed to get out alive. To survive meant to carry an impossible-to-forget burden, and the sudden freedom felt more like a shock than a celebration. The encounter with the liberating soldiers was disconcerting and almost surreal. When I saw the soldiers, I didn't know if they were real, a survivor would recall. I thought it was another dream. Disbelief mixed with hope, with a sensation that oscillated between safety and residual fear. Many could not immediately comprehend that the nightmare was over, that death and the absolute control of the SS were now behind them. Every gesture of the liberators, every greeting, every order, had to be interpreted carefully. The mind had learned to distrust even kindness or safety. Liberation was neither immediate nor complete. Some prisoners continued to be transported in the death marches, while others died in the barracks without receiving help. The survivors had to confront the horror of a place that still breathed death and despair. The images of abandoned bodies, of empty barracks filled with human remains, of personal objects scattered on the ground, revealed that Auschwitz was a camp where time and life had been suspended by years of suffering. The arrival of the liberators only marked the beginning of a new challenge, rebuilding life from a place where everything had been destroyed. Fear, exhaustion, and confusion were omnipresent. Some could not walk, others could not speak. Mind and body were broken. Each survivor had to decide how to move forward, how to react to the soldiers, how to face the reality that the outside world still existed. The transition from the concentration camp to freedom was painful, filled with contradictory emotions: relief, disbelief, pain, survivor's guilt. The sensation of living in a limbo between the nightmare that was ending and the reality that was beginning marked every moment of those final days. The testimonies of the survivors revealed the emotional intensity of those moments. The mixture of disbelief, hope, and fear created a unique mental state. the sense that the outside world was another nightmare, different but equally challenging. The mind needed to reorganize itself, rebuild itself, and adapt to a space where freedom was available, but where memories of horror remained intact, accompanying every step, every decision, every breath. Liberation was physical, but the mind needed time to free itself from Auschwitz. Finally, the last days in Auschwitz show a painful truth. Liberation did not erase suffering, nor did it eliminate the memory of horror. The camp, exhausted and in ruins, became a testimony to the collapse of the Nazi system, to human resistance, and to survival in the face of the unimaginable. Every step toward freedom was filled with emotion, fear, and reflection. When I saw the soldiers, I didn't know if they were real. I thought it was another dream. That phrase encapsulates the experience of those who passed through hell, and despite everything, managed to go on, carrying with them memories that history must never forget. Auschwitz is not only a geographical place, nor a mark in history. It is a living symbol of the horror that humanity is capable of inflicting upon itself when intolerance, hatred, and blind obedience combine with absolute power. Every block, every barbed wire fence, every chimney represents lives torn away, names erased, and futures destroyed. Auschwitz is not just a place, it is an eternal warning. That warning is not limited to a specific time or space. It reminds us that indifference and complicity in the face of evil can allow the unimaginable to become reality. Every story that emerged from that hell, every testimony from those who survived and those who perished, carries the need to understand that humanity must remain vigilant, that memory is the strongest barrier against the repetition of horror. Remembering Auschwitz is not simply recalling dates, numbers, or names, but immersing oneself in the experience of those who were stripped of their identity and forced to confront death daily. It is recognizing the magnitude of destruction and pain that a fanatical ideology and an organized extermination system were able to cause. Remembering is not looking back. It is preventing horror from gaining a name again. Every preserved memory, every testimony heard, acts as an invisible wall that protects future generations from the same systematic and ruthless violence. The history of Auschwitz teaches us that moral vigilance, education, and historical awareness are the only weapons against the repetition of such barbarity. The lesson of Auschwitz is also profoundly human. It is not only about statistics or cold facts. It is about people, families, children, and the elderly, individuals who faced extreme circumstances with courage, fear, desperation, and in some cases, silent resistance. Understanding this forces us to reflect on our own responsibility as a society, how we can act in the face of injustice, how we can prevent intolerance and hatred from growing unchecked, how we can recognize and protect the dignity of every human being, even when systems of power attempt to crush it. Every testimony, every account from survivors, is a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Even amid the most extreme suffering, there were sparks of solidarity, inner resistance, memory, and hope that allowed some to survive. This duality between systematic barbarism and the capacity for individual resistance teaches us that memory is not passive. It demands action, vigilance, and commitment to justice and humanity. Auschwitz forces us to ask what we are doing today to ensure that no system of hatred can reproduce the same tragedy. Furthermore, the memory of Auschwitz serves as a warning about the fragility of civilization in the face of extremism. What happened there did not arise out of nowhere. It was the result of radical ideologies, the silence of the majority, and blind obedience. Every time we forget, every time we minimize the suffering of others, we open the door to the repetition of history. That is why remembering is an act of collective responsibility. It is an ethical and moral commitment to those who could not survive, to those who were silenced, and to those who fought to preserve their humanity in the face of the impossible. Today, as we reflect on Auschwitz, we understand that memory is not merely an academic exercise, nor a historical curiosity. It is a constant duty. Keeping the history of the concentration camps alive is preventing future generations from confronting the same horrors without preparation or warning. It is recognizing the depth of evil, but also the capacity of the human being to resist and survive. Remembering Auschwitz is honoring the victims, recognizing the courage of the survivors, and committing to educate, denounce, and act in the face of any sign of hatred or injustice. Finally, the end of this reflection is also a call to action for those who accompany us on this journey through historical memory. The responsibility to remember does not end with this video. It continues in every discussion, in every lesson, and in every gesture that contributes to keeping alive the memory of those who suffered. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment if you enjoyed the video. Your support helps us continue sharing more stories that deserve to be remembered. Every click, every comment, and every subscription are acts of active memory, of commitment to humanity, and of the ethical obligation to ensure that Auschwitz is never repeated.